And here we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. And joining me today is another author making their debut on the show, as well as another AudioMaze author. Now, my guest today is a content marketing manager by day and aspiring author by night. His writing explores genres like cosmic horror, science fiction, and fantasy, often experimenting with combinations of the three. And you can find all of his work on AudioMazes and Substack, where he runs a publication called The Writer's Journey. And he's also the host of the Saved as Draft podcast and creative director of an upcoming animated horror comedy series called The Chronicles of Clenchport. And to talk about that more, as well as his experiences with AudioMaze, let's give a huge round of applause to today's guest, fellow author and fellow AudioMaze member, Bradley Ramsey. Bradley, welcome to the show.
Hi, Gabriel. Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to be here.
Awesome, Bradley. Awesome. I'm so excited to have you here. Now, is there anything else you'd like to share with our viewers and listeners? Anything that wasn't mentioned in the introduction?
I think one thing that I forgot to include in the introduction that I sent you was I was actually a professional ghostwriter for about 5 years. Prior to, I would say, in total, that was close to 10 years ago, because in the last sort of 4 to 5 years, I've kind of restarted my writing journey, if you will, by putting my own work out there. And so that's kind of where these new projects have been popping up, where now it's my name on the project. But just a fun little fact about me, as part of my writing past.
Awesome, that's incredible. And speaking of writing, I know for anyone who follows Bradley on his socials, he's done a lot of writing, from short stories. As Bradley also mentioned, he was a ghostwriter for many years, as well as working on a lot of projects. His personal project, as well as projects for AudioMaze, which we'll touch on later in the interview. So, Bradley, for your personal projects, for your stories, what can you give us as a little teaser, a little window into what we can expect from you, possibly anything coming out this year?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I just started in January a Substack publication called The Writer's Journey. It's been going incredibly well. We've been hosting different writing challenges, and I've been publishing combinations of poetry, articles about writing, and short fiction on there. I've been doing short stories for several years now, while also working on some of the other projects that I have in the pipeline. As far as what you can expect from me coming up soon here, a couple of things. As you mentioned in my bio, I am currently working on a kind of an indie animated series that I'm really excited to kind of get up off the ground. We have a team of about 15 people working on it, and nice. There's some exciting stuff there. Obviously, AudioMazes, some stuff coming there. I am also hoping to finish drafting the first book in a cosmic horror trilogy this year. That I've been working on for a while now, and it's one of those things where I've constantly kind of put it to the side to do other things, but I'm hoping to get it done this year.
Nice.
And last but not least, I'm also launching a fantasy series, a serial kind of series on Substack soon, that is set within my broader fantasy and sci-fi universe. So I'm really excited to get that started soon. There's a few fans on Substack who've been asking about it, so.
Well, that's incredible. You are, again, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, Bradley is very, very busy working on so many incredible projects. It just leaves to wonder, how this passion for writing came about. So, Bradley, how did this passion for the written word, come about in your life? Was it something that you've always been fascinated by growing up? Did you read a lot? Or did this sort of come about through, family friend, a relative, or just by complete accident?
Sure. So my earliest memory of wanting to be a writer actually goes all the way back to 2nd grade when I was in elementary school. I don't remember the exact story that I wrote, but I entered a creative writing contest, and I got 3rd place, and I got a trophy out of it and everything. And I just, from that point, I can't remember wanting to ever be anything else but a writer. That was kind of one of, if not the first stories I ever wrote. And then as time went on, into middle school, high school, and college, I just, I kept writing stories, kept honing my craft, and again, nothing else ever appealed to me. It was always just, I want to be a writer. And, there was a time in my career where I worked in retail and stuff for some of my first jobs. But as soon as I was able, I became a freelance writer, and that eventually led to my current role, which is I'm on a marketing team, of course, as the writer. And so, yeah, it's been a lifelong passion of mine. And I've had some great friends and support over the years who have, kind of pushed me through some of the harder times when life got tough. And, I wondered if maybe this wasn't the right thing, just,
Right.
purely from like a career standpoint, if anything. But yeah, no, I'm very fortunate to have kind of discovered writing very early on. And, regardless of whatever life has thrown at me, it's never been something that I ever considered to stop doing.
Amazing, Bradley. Simply amazing. So what would you consider your aha moment when you realize you want to take your passion for writing in the sense of creative writing and build a career off it? I know you just said you work in marketing as the writer. You've also done, writing for other people. And that, of course, did help build up your skill set. But what would you consider the definitive moment in your author's journey that you wanted to establish your brand?
It's a good question. So I did do a lot of reading growing up. I was a big fan of, I remember I read Goosebumps books. I practically every single one that R.L. Stine ever released. But I read a lot of books, growing up. And then the other part of my hobbies as a kid, and of course up until now, is that I'm also a huge gamer. So I've always been so fascinated by gaming as a way to tell interactive stories, especially stories that are malleable or can change based on your decisions and input. That's incredible to me, and it will never not be amazing to me. And so, having that as a hobby, it really kind of fueled my desire and inspiration to write. And yeah, when it comes to my creative sort of brand, I would say when I was in high school, I made my first attempt at writing a book, and unfortunately I don't have it anymore. That was before the days of Google Drive and cloud saving. But I remember writing a book of a sort back then, and using my parents' printer to print out the latest draft, and I would take it to school, and friends would pass it around and read it, and just seeing people resonating with my work there, it was kind of I think an aha moment where I was like, hey, I could probably do this. I could actually people like what I'm writing, so clearly I got something going right for me, and yeah, from there it's just I kind of keep my professional and personal writing separated. I do professional marketing type writing, which I do enjoy, but I've really kind of been exploring, I think in the most detail ever, my creative writing brand, if you will, through the Substack publication that I launched, which is a combination of obviously bringing my own work to the table, but I'm also very passionate about building writing communities and really supporting them in genuine ways and just helping other writers kind of have their own aha moments, if you will. That's something I'm really passionate about. And so I want that to be an important part of my brand in addition to what I bring to the table.
Absolutely. I have to agree. I've met a lot of people on the show who are, very much of the same mindset, Bradley, that they began in more of the corporate world and they developed skills in one aspect of writing, but when they went into more of the creative side, they realized, okay, there's two different writing styles for both. I got to keep them separate. When I'm in this, I write like this. When I am at home and in my own free time, I can write like this and express my creativity. And sometimes, again, I have had a lot of authors on the show who said that that's probably not very easy, that if you've grown up with one style of writing or have been taught one style of writing, it's very difficult to change and to really understand your own voice as an author. But that's the thing about the writer's journey. It changes and there's a lot of hurdles along the way, but it's not impossible. So now let's jump ahead. So when you began writing your own stories, in a general sense, whenever you start on a project, Bradley, what are the goals you have going into a project as the author, as well as the promises you're making to your prospective readers and audience?
Sure. So as I mentioned, I've been doing a lot of short fiction, so short stories, usually under 10,000 words. I've been doing those pretty consistently for several years now. And so I've been doing a lot of focus there, as well as some poetry and stuff like that. But as far as, how I kind of set out to work on a project, I usually have a general idea in mind of the length that I want to go for. So that way I can kind of keep the scope in check from the beginning. That's an important part of it. And I think what people kind of expect, and what I like to provide as a writer for the reader is, I like to take things that people are familiar with, but kind of shift the perspective or mash it up with a different genre or kind of flip an existing trope on its head, those kind of things. So I think when I go into it, one of the expectations that I kind of have for myself and obviously that readers expect from me is that this will feel familiar, but it's also going to feel very unique and new. It's going to be kind of that mixture of, nostalgia and then also kind of, just pure creativity.
Absolutely. And when you began writing your stories, or let's talk about the first story, because going back to the introduction, you have a story that you've been working on for a while now, but you kind of put it to the side. When you began working on that project in particular, what was the reaction like from friends and family who learned that you were writing this book that would be the start of a series?
Sure. So what's funny about that one is that it actually started as a short story. And this goes all the way back to 2016. So this is before I even decided that it was going to be a book. But the initial story in 2016 was kind of this post-apocalyptic sort of dystopian type of setting. I know I wanted a cosmic horror element, and the kind of working title that I had was just "I Voted" is all that it was called. And I started working on it, and it had kind of multiple POVs, and I was like, this is interesting. But I started asking myself, this feels like, obviously this is after some sort of apocalypse. What happened before, and then I kept ruminating on that, right? And then from there, it kind of evolved to where I was like, wait a second, this short story could be its own book, sure, but it feels midway through like a trilogy, right? So what I did was I kind of rewound the clock timeline-wise. And so the project that I'm working on now is book 1 that takes place before that kind of first idea that I had.
Okay. And
keeping with the original title, book 1 is entitled "For Those About to Vote." So it kind of leads into that second title a bit. So I've been working on that one for a few years here, and I'm really excited about it. Friends and family were very interested in it. I kind of started shopping around the premise to a few people. I recall distinctly I was at a company party actually out on the West Coast, and we were talking about the book, and that was the first time I kind of pitched it to a stranger, a relative stranger. He was a coworker, obviously. But I could see his eyes light up, kind of being like, whoa, this is really cool. That sounds really good, And so that was really cool. And ever since then, I've had a lot of kind of confidence in the idea as a whole. So I'm excited to get it out there. It's very ambitious.
Nice. And from these, very positive responses, would you feel that this and your other projects have almost had a sense of, not a sense of validation? Say validation is important, but your promises and your goals have been met from the outpour, from people's interest in the stories, short stories, poetry, and series. The reaction is there, the drive is there.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, something that I struggled with a little bit earlier on as a writer is I would be working on things and then I would see other media, whether it's other books, movies, TV shows, games, with similar kind of ideas. And I would go, oh no, that's similar to what I'm doing. That invalidates what I'm doing, and that was how I kind of originally thought about it. But in reality, and I'm sure you would agree, having comparisons like that is actually a good thing, because people then kind of attach their own sort of interest to your project because they recognize pieces of it from something else. So I've since embraced that when that happens, and and as a result, it definitely motivates me because people can kind of draw some of those parallels in a good way. So
absolutely. And also, I had my own kind of, deja vu moment when it came to, seeing something that was eerily similar to my own. One of my stories that I've sometimes shown on the show, Michael, Last Angel of Earth, I've had two guests on the show, Fernando and Francisco Colombrana. Both are talented authors. And what really hit the deja vu moment for me, we were all writing about stories of angels versus demons, some elements of the Nephilim, and I was like, okay, this is too much of a coincidence. I don't like this. Are we just all thinking the same thing? Do we just write this? And I told them about this, and it was crazy for them. It's like, hey, you know, we like writing the same stories. But I agree with what you're saying, that, you know, I could see how at that point it would be in a sense of like, oh, you know, someone's already written this similar thing, or maybe a better version of my own. But at the end of the day, you know, we're not trying to be like anyone else. We're trying to be ourselves. And it's always interesting to see, oh, well, this person took something similar or an idea that I didn't consider. Let's see how they go with it. Because at the end of the day, in this industry, which we will talk about later, we're all trying to support one another. We're all trying to help one another, because being a writer is not easy whatsoever. And this leads to a very powerful question, Bradley, or one of a few powerful questions, which is, you know, and I'm sure you definitely felt this when you began your journey as a writer, is that when we began writing our first anything, whether it's our short story, poetry, or beginning of a novel, we input it with a little bit of ourselves into it, and we see it as a part of us. I know that's always a big no for authors, that they shouldn't tie their work to their own self-worth, but it's kind of hard, especially when it's your first book. And now with social media, it is a blessing and a curse for authors. On one side, we're able to use it for good reasons, in the sense of, you know, making connections, reaching new readerships, and, you know, driving home, hey, this is us, this is what we write, this is where you can find us, etc. On the other side, we do leave ourselves exposed to a lot of hate speech, trolls, spam, and a lot of other negativity that can be hugely detrimental to a person's mental health and their overall well-being. And of course, the dreaded imposter syndrome is always going to be in the back of every author and every creative's mind, which can make them reconsider, do they want to pursue this? So, Bradley, I'm curious, when you began this journey of yours, did you ever have those moments of heightened anxiety or imposter syndrome? And if so, or if not, what has disciplined you to continue going down the writer's path? Because you know, deep in your soul, this is who you are, and this is the industry you want to be a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Yeah, over the course of my writing journey, I would say there have been times where I've, you know, kind of been hit, definitely imposter syndrome. As I always say, imposter syndrome comes for all of us. You know, it doesn't matter how successful you are or how early on you are in your journey. You will experience it. It's just a fact of being a writer. So yes, that's definitely happened to me. As far as, you know, kind of the negative aspects of being online and working as a writer, I've been mostly fortunate enough to not encounter a ton of negativity toward my work in particular. That's not to say that it's never happened. I can actually think of one example. It's not necessarily a creative example, but when I was a freelance writer, I had done this article for a client, and it was the first article I'd done for them. And it had something to do with finance or something. It wasn't typically a topic that I was very well versed in, but I tried my best. And I remember the editor coming back, and I'll never forget this. He said that my writing was untenable. That was the term he used. Ooh. Which that one hit home. That really hurt. And it's why I still think about it all these years later. But like I said, I've been fortunate enough to not have a ton of negativity. That being said, I have struggled, you know, especially in my early years of starting to put my work out there under my name after leaving the ghostwriter life behind. I struggled with what I consider to be a different kind of challenge, where you're putting yourself out there, you're putting out what you think is great work, and just nothing's happening, good or bad, right? It's, you know, that can be, I think, its own sort of beast that you have to, you know, grapple with as a writer. It's like, you know, it's almost worse, but, you know, at least if someone's, you know, throwing negativity at it, well, at least somebody's reading it, right? You know, not doing anything at all, that's its own thing. And, you know, I don't have a magic, you know, cure for that type of situation, except for the fact that I tried to keep going, and I definitely had support like around me in terms of there were several friends who would always kind of show up and read the work, you know, and give me their feedback. And, obviously I wanted tons of people reading it, and I wanted strangers talking about it and all this stuff, but that didn't happen right away. And so it's really important, I think, for you to have, at least, in your inner circle, some people who are, kind of your cheerleaders in terms of they'll read your work, they'll give you real feedback, they'll give you balanced, critiques and stuff like that. I think that's crucial because, if you're just writing in a vacuum and putting your work out there, you're never really going to grow, number one, because you're not going to get that feedback that you need. And number two, you might, kind of burn yourself out because, you're, as writers often say, shouting into the void, right? But I'm also a firm believer in, if you just keep going, every writer's journey in terms of like where they go and their path to success, it's all different. But if you keep going and you're consistent and you stay true to yourself and your writing voice, you will eventually find that spark and that uptake that leads to people talking about your work and leaving comments and all that good stuff. So it's just you just have to keep going. And I'm a perfect example of that, because it wasn't until January of this year that I started on Substack, where I, within the last few months, have grown a huge audience that is multiple times larger than anything I've ever had before in my entire writing journey. And so it really is. And, I haven't done anything different. I've just been being myself this whole time. Right. So It does pay off. It does. It pays off eventually, but it's just a matter of time.
Absolutely. And, I 100% agree. When I started this journey for the interviews, this was all something I had never considered. I've always shared this video, or not video, but this stuff that I've shared with many people, which is I began this podcast solely as a way to break the boredom during COVID.
Right.
I just did it as a way to, keep busy, keep sane, as many of us were trying to do during those 4 years, and then just snowballed into, this incredible thing. And when Anchor reached the height that it would get, I realized with, the support of many people, friends and family, who pushed me to make a YouTube channel, I realized, you know what, let's do it.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, YouTube channel, which is now 3 years old, I've had almost 152 authors on the show, 45 historians come on the show, and making a whole bunch of other videos. And I would never have imagined in my wildest dreams I would be doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a grind, but it's something that I am very, very passionate about. Just as you are rather passionate about Substack, the contest you and your team make for your fellow writers, and just a community you have made. And speaking of community, this leads to a very interesting question, which I would love to hear your thoughts on, Bradley. And this comes from one of my previous guests, Ms. Jasmine Young, who told on her Instagram that, in her opinion, a golden age kind of emerged, or has emerged, from the 4 years of quarantine. Because in those 4 years, a lot of people were in positions where, they were isolated, they were alone, and they had to grow their own businesses for some of them.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process, a lot of authors were born, a lot of musicians found that passion again, and a lot of artists were able to find the time to actually hone their craft. But by posing this question to my other guests, I've been getting very differing opinions. Mm-hmm. Some have argued that we're not in a golden age. Others have argued that a golden age was on the rise and COVID just accelerated it. And while others say that we're not in a golden age, but it's not for the reason of, there's a lot of things, there's a lack of, in sense of, a lack of creativity. There's not a creative drive pushing these new items, whether it's music, artwork, or books, into the forefront. So for Bradley, in your opinion, do you think there is a golden age of creators right now, or are we not in a golden age?
I think it's interesting because if I look at it from the perspective of my kind of, my sphere, if you will, both in person and online, I would absolutely say that we're in a golden age from what I can see in my immediate kind of viewpoint, right? I would say 100% we are. But that comes from obviously personal experience and from the experience that I've had, especially like I said this year joining Substack. I see incredible and unique and constant creativity all around me. Since this year has started, and I found this new community and platform. So from my perspective, yes, 100%. There is we are in a golden age. I'm seeing golden creativity everywhere I look. It's fantastic.
Nice.
And I myself feel like I'm in a golden age, right? For myself and my journey. Yeah.
Right, absolutely. That's true. And this question does have its own fair share of opinions, all of which, have very good, valid points. And maybe you would also agree on this perspective, Bradley, that perhaps we're not in a golden age because there's no creative drive in the sense that, as one of my guests said, anyone could make a book, anyone could make music, anyone could paint or draw, but there's no passion behind it. And with the rise of AI, now more than ever, taking precedent over everything, writing, music, narration, artwork, etc. Yes, there's a huge influx of all of these incredible things, but there's no passion, no creative drive behind it. So in that sense, would you argue that we are not in a golden age?
I think whatever golden age that we're in, either the one that I see around myself, or if we zoom out to the broader sort of just, planet Earth, all the creatives around planet Earth, I think whatever golden age exists within pockets of that, I do think that is under threat from things like AI. But it's not solely AI. I mean, I do have a lot of thoughts there, but AI is part of it. The other part of it, I think, is that if we look at Hollywood, for example, and also to an extent the gaming industry, I feel like the reason why you don't see as much creativity or passion, quote unquote, there as you used to, is because there's this fear of failing, right? Especially from a financial standpoint. You know what I mean? And that's why we're seeing a lot of these remakes, and in the gaming space, we have a lot of remasters. It's because they're using ideas that they know work, right? Because they're afraid of losing money, when it comes down to it, which is the unfortunate truth of entertainment. You know what I mean? And so I think that fear of failure is stifling creativity in the entertainment industry 100%. And then when you bring in the AI aspect of it, I think AI in general, by its very nature, doesn't contain passion or, in my opinion, creativity, right? It's mechanical. It's taking pieces of a beautiful puzzle that was made by people and rearranging them. That's all it's doing. You know what I mean? Right. And so when you do that, I think when you take out the human element, you're taking away what makes it special, point blank. And as a result of those two things, I do think that any golden age that I perceive or that anyone else perceives is in fact in danger as a result of those things.
Absolutely. That's a really good point, Bradley. And I love how you brought up, the point of, this fear of failure that, most people, again, you're right, that trying something new in the past, that's what everyone was trying to make. Make something new, whether it's like new books, new games, new films.
Right.
But from those original ideas, it created a culture around it. And unfortunately, again, you're right. If it's not broken, why fix it? If it's a safe, IP. And again, that does kind of hamper creativity and sort of stall it because nothing is being made, or in the sense of, making something new originally, whereas everything's getting remade, remastered, or reinterpreted, and whatever else you would want to do. And especially in the publishing world, with all that in mind, it's really also challenging for authors to really understand, okay, where do I want to go for my journey? I have something that is completely different. It's not the standards, not the norm. Where do I want to go? So for you, Bradley, I know some of your work is still in the, I want to say almost like in like the publishing phase, like it's on the verge of possibly being published.
Mhm.
But how much research did you do to really understand what pathway for you was best, whether it's self-published, traditionally published, or hybrid?
Sure. So part of that kind of dream of mine that goes all the way back to that second grade story that I told you is that I've always wanted to be traditionally published. I have no qualms with self-publishing, and I do think it's a fantastic option, for everyone, but also myself potentially if the traditional route doesn't go the way that I plan. But being traditionally published has always been kind of a goal of mine. So on a personal note, it's just something that I would like to do, especially with the book that I'm working on. And as far as research goes, that's a really good question. So one of the things that I really believe in is that the advice that you hear from a lot of authors that says, write the book that you want to read, right? So that's exactly what I'm doing, right? Like the idea comes from obviously a little bit of myself, as you mentioned. I put some of myself into the book, but the idea is also informed by, what I consume as far as entertainment and stuff goes. So I'm looking at things across that space in similar genres and stories that I think resonate with me, and I'm taking kind of little ingredients from that and putting it into the book, if you will. And then the other part of it is just the world that we live in, right? Like it's impossible with everything going on in the world to not say something about it, right? Like you don't have to make the whole book, about like that one thing or make it so similar that it feels like you're just reading a documentary. But at the same time, I think it's important to at least comment on those things. And, even though the book is entirely fictional and there's plenty of cosmic horror elements that are way outside the realm of our reality, right? I still think beneath all of that, there's a real message that I'm hoping to get across. And several messages, in fact. It's not even just one. So my hope is that the combination of the unique premise, the fact that cosmic horror has kind of become a little bit more popular in recent years. I've seen, perfect example was it only lasted one season, but on HBO there's a TV show called Lovecraft Country that was very horror, and that was also an inspiration for my book. And so I'm seeing that kind of trend of those things becoming more prevalent, and obviously having something to say about the world and then adding myself to it. My hope is that those three things, when they come together, will create something that really potentially resonates with people, and hopefully with literary agents when I get to that point, start querying the book. But yeah, that's kind of been my thought process with that project.
And that's also very, very true. I mean, that was a dream for a lot of authors, before self-publishing truly became a viable option for a lot of authors. It was go traditional or go broke, because as I said, that was the only pathway. And everyone still wants to go traditional publishing, and all the power to them, because being an indie author, yes, you do have the creative control of your story, but it's not for everybody, because you do have to manage everything. You have to find the editors, you have to find the cover artists, you have to save up money to get your book formatted, you have to do all of that out of pocket, and that's not easy. That can be very, very detrimental to a person. Whereas if you go traditional or hybrid, the work's not all on you. Someone else can carry the burden. And also, it's important to know the publishing house you are marketing to, really understanding the books they are producing. Again, as you said, Bradley, write the book that you want to read. I myself, I agree with that. I have always written books, my personal books, based off the stories that I've enjoyed reading. A lot of them I have them right here, Simon Scarrow, Jack White, Matt Conant and Lauren Kippelow, fellow sci-fi authors, and many more people. And it is a lot of research, and people don't really take that into consideration. And speaking of research, probably the one aspect a lot of people tend to overlook is, the audience and the readership. And this is a two-part question, Bradley. So, as a lead up to this question or questions, when we write our own stories, when you and me, we write our own stories, we are the focal point. We are the target audience because we know the story better than anyone else. But with that said, we do have to take into consideration who else is going to enjoy this story. So that leads to these questions. So the first part of this question is, in your opinion, when should an author take into account their audience, during the writing phase or near the editing publishing phase? And in your opinion, do you have a good idea of your audience / readership? Because that's another thing people often overlook, is the readership of like, whereas it falls under YA, NA, adult fiction, which has its own set of rules and expectations.
Right. No, that's a great question. I think that the audience should be something that is considered as early as possible in the process. Not to the extent that it overrides your vision, but I think you should have in mind who this book is for from the beginning, like you said, during the writing, as opposed to waiting to the editing and, possibly, querying or, pre-publication stage. I think it's really important to consider who's going to be reading it, because in my opinion, if you consider it early on, you can adapt that into your vision as you're writing, right?
Right.
And so I think that's really important. Could you repeat the second part of the question for me?
Of course. So the second part of the question was, for you, Bradley, as a writer and as an author, do you have a good idea of your audience as well as your readership?
Thank you. Yes. So something that I've done, and I'm not saying this is for everybody, but one of the reasons why I've been focusing so much on building kind of a platform and an audience with my short stories is because I wanted to identify, number one, is there an audience for my style of writing, right? Regardless of genre, do people like the way that I write? You know what I mean?
Right.
And number two, because I consider my ideas to kind of be familiar yet different, I wanted to kind of test that idea as well with the audience on a broad sort of internet sort of, playing field. I wanted to test, does any of this resonate with people? Do people like this kind of the weird and different angles that I come to with these different genres? And so I've been running kind of a, multi-year experiment in that regard, where I have been publishing stories that are either very similar or in some cases even set in the same universe as my book. And so I do that, and then I look and see how they perform, and that kind of provides me with some sort of, data to kind of, put back into the book as it's being written. So that's a perfect example of how you can sort of assess your audience as you go.
Absolutely, 100%. And speaking of, audience and stories, this is now a perfect time to talk about, as we mentioned before, viewers and listeners, Bradley is also a member of AudioMaze, and being a part of this, incredible community. I would like to hear your thoughts on it, Bradley. So let's start at the beginning for that. So how did you sort of learn of AudioMaze, and how did you sort of join this incredible community that has now gone beyond anyone's expectations?
Yeah, so I think it was only a couple of months ago at this point that I first heard about AudioMazes. But if it, now that I'm a part of the team, it really feels like I've been friends with all of you, forever. It's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. But as far as how I heard about it, I became friends with one of the other AudioMazes authors, Wild Nebula, on Instagram, and it started out with us just kind of, liking each other's posts. We followed each other. We didn't really talk or anything. And then one day, Wild Nebula sent me a DM, and she was like, "Hey, I read the branching narrative story," because I had published one of those, as an experiment. I did my own sort of multi-path story on Substack. So she goes, "Hey, I saw you did like a branching narrative type story." She's like, I'm working with this company called AudioMazes, and they have kind of a public sort of meet and greet call happening this weekend. And I thought you would be perfect to check it out, So she kind of just reached out with that. And I'm sitting here going, oh my gosh, yes, that sounds amazing. Because as I mentioned at the beginning, I used to read Goosebumps books, and you can bet I read the ones that had multiple endings and everything, and I loved all of that. I loved it. So AudioMazes from the very beginning, the premise and the concept of the entire platform immediately caught my attention for that reason.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I went to that first meet and greet. That was when I first met you, actually. And Yeah, I was sold from the beginning. You didn't even have to pitch me the whole idea. I was like, how do we get started? So I was very excited to find out about it.
That's amazing. And also, viewers and listeners, Bradley has also been working on many stories for Audiomaze, as I've been working on some stories. Now, we can't give too much detail because that is going to be reserved for another interview for Audiomaze. But as a little teaser, Bradley, how was it, in a way, different from how you traditionally have written? Because, as you just mentioned before, you did try your own choose your own adventure story, but for this story in particular, or I should say for the stories for Audiomaze in particular, how was that process, and what can you tell us as a little teaser of what we can expect from you from Audiomaze?
Sure. So as far as what makes it different, the first and most obvious thing is the length, right? So Audiomaze's books are significantly longer than, for example, the kind of branching narrative short stories that I've done. So that's number one. I had to think on a bigger scope, right? And the other part of it too is that Audiomazes, it's as the name suggests, audio based. It's all about immersive audio and audiobooks. So you have to kind of, from the beginning as a writer, think about, will this sound good? Not necessarily because I think there's a difference between something that reads well and something that sounds well, when it's read out loud. So that's another major consideration. And then, obviously with a bigger book means more paths, it means more endings. So it's overall a more complex story in a good way. And then when you add in the audio angle, that's just another kind of consideration from the get-go in terms of how it's different. But I will say, and I'm sure you would agree, some of the team members at Audiomazes, they're really good about onboarding new authors and kind of explaining the preferred sort of structure and everything and how it all works. And so it wasn't there wasn't a lot of friction for me in terms of learning how to kind of adapt to what Audiomazes needs for its unique sort of books that they're producing. It wasn't difficult at all for me. And I've obviously been talking to some of the other new authors that joined Audiomazes and trying to help them with, any questions they have as much as I can. Right. Overall, it seems like the onboarding process is pretty smooth. As far as what readers can expect, from my work with Audiomazes, the company, as you know, is very reliant on, at least right now, they're focusing on a kind of 90s sort of nostalgia. And so you can definitely expect that from my books. I love kind of dropping in some of those 90s Easter eggs. As I've said in the interview here, it's really about taking familiar ideas and putting a new spin on them. So without giving away too much, my first book with Audiomazes is called Dragon's Domain, which I've talked about elsewhere. And that book is set during the 90s and kind of an alternate history of what we know from the 90s, where dragons are a part of everyday life, which obviously that alone changes the whole dynamic, right? And I won't say anything else because I think readers will be really excited when they hear the full kind of pitch for the story. But that's just a perfect example of, like, we all know dragons. Yes, dragons have been around forever in fantasy and stuff like that. But it's not very often that you see them in a real world sort of modern setting. It has happened. I can think of a few, examples. But again, that's me kind of taking something you know and love and bringing a new spin to it.
Absolutely. And as like a final question to like this little Audiomaze segment, what has it been for you as a creator to really be a part of a community that truly does foster, a positive influence in an industry which has now been, it's always going to be changing. The public industry is always going to be changing. And with, going back to what we talked about, so many of the same books being written numerous times over, and a lot of other books being flagged by, companies as being written by AI, to be part of a company that truly cares about its authors, editors, narrators. What did that mean to you as a creator to be a part of this community, this family?
That's a great question. And I think it's one of those things where as excited as I was and still am obviously about Audiomazes, I think if I had gone to that first call and there wasn't the amount of kind of passion and kind of human first creativity that Audiomazes, kind of brings to the table, if I showed up on that call and it was and I realized that, yes, they're doing something really cool, but they're not really, kind of fostering, as you said, that community. If I had detected that, I probably would have walked away, because, I would have said, this is cool, but it's not really, it's checking a lot of boxes, but, I need to know that, people and creatives, are going to be valued, and that their skills and their talents are going to be used in the best way possible here. And obviously, none of that was the case. That's all hypothetical.
Right.
AudioMazes absolutely does all of those things. They, from the very beginning, Sophia, one of the founder and CEOs of the company, her passion for creativity in general, whether it's narrators, editors, authors, artists, and so on, it was apparent from the minute that I saw her on that call that she had tons of passion and drive, for really highlighting human creativity in a very genuine way. And so, that it was really important to me whenever I work with someone or a company like that there's, yes, I want to see human first. I want to see, focus on creativity and, keeping AI at a distance. I want to see that that's a deal breaker. But the other side of it too is I want to see a community. I want to see, fostering growth across multiple disciplines of creativity. And AudioMazes absolutely showed me that from the get-go.
100%, and I absolutely agree. And it's hard to imagine that, for us as like a company that we've only been around for, just 4 months, and we've accomplished so much in such a short amount of time. I mean, getting a lot of incredible authors, you, Kaylee, Wild Nebula, Jaden, Aaron, and so many more. It's just incredible. And just seeing, as you said, this community that has grown, which also the narrators and the editors who are also now in a community that also values their talents as well, especially the narrators whose, there's a little tangent, viewers and listeners. If you didn't see on social media, there was a huge movement from, narrators doing human voice only. And a lot of our close friends, me and Bradley's close friends who are in the narrating world, were showcasing their talents by reading segments from stories submitted. Like I was able to submit some of my stories. Bradley, I imagine you probably sent some as well to your colleagues, and just helping foster this amazing and incredible community. Because again, the publishing industry is changing for better or for worse. That's up to interpretation. And this kind of leads now into a very powerful question, which I always love asking my guests, Bradley. So I'll give context to this question. So as I've said before, I've been doing the show now in total 6 to 7 years. And I've had the opportunity to meet a wide range of amazing, incredible people. And from those interactions, from those interviews, I've come to learn, and maybe you have thoughts on this, that as authors, as writers, there are two paths: to be an author, to be known as an author. One is dedicated to the craft of storytelling. The other is dedicated to the business side. And both have their own set of hurdles, their own set of challenges. But in this industry, your goals need to be realistic. This is not a get-rich-quick money scheme. And the hard truth is, there is no guarantee your first book is going to be the start of your legacy. It's a hard pill to swallow, but generally speaking, that is the case. Now, there are some exceptions to the rule. There are many authors, some of which I've had featured on the show, whose first works did start their careers. And that's not an easy thing to do from the get-go. All the power to them. But again, that's not the case. 9 times out of 10, most authors are not going to build their career from their first book. It may be their second, third, or 10th book that they really get their name out there. And the goals have to be realistic. So Bradley, for you, with everything you've learned in your own journey as a writer, as an author, as well as being in the public sphere as like a marketing manager, as well as being a ghostwriter, how would you help someone understand that, yes, it is true, this industry is not going to guarantee you success outright, but that shouldn't stop you from honing your craft?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a large part of that is that, and it doesn't have to happen, at any specific point in your journey. But I think something that I have come to understand, that I think other writers should also understand, is that you need to derive, it's impossible to derive all of your kind of drive and your own fulfillment and satisfaction from, from just the craft of writing. We're all human at the end of the day. So yes, we are going to feel satisfied and fulfilled if we see those numbers going up when it comes to reads and sales and all those things that indicate a success, right? That's always going to provide like a positive kind of motivation for anyone, because we're human beings, right? But it's so important that beneath that, and aside from that, that you derive your own sort of satisfaction from your work, whether it's, for me specifically, it's, whenever I'm writing, it's because, number one, it feels right. It feels like I am kind of working within my purpose when I write stories. Number one, it's just, on a spiritual level, it feels good to write stories for me, right?
Right.
And then the other part of it too is that a lot of what I write, I always joke that it's like free therapy. Like it's the ability for me to put myself into these fictional kind of worlds and characters and stories and work through problems or kind of, confront things about myself or my past, and do so in a way where I can kind of work through it and come out on the other side, a little more healed, right? And, the amazing thing about it is that other people can read those stories and get a similar reaction. They can feel seen, or they can resonate with it, or they can feel like they're working through some stuff that, that they've been through. And so you really have to get to a point where you're always going to care a little bit about how well or how not well your stories do. And that's just being human. But you should also derive, as much of that satisfaction and fulfillment as possible from just your craft and what you're doing and what you're getting out of it. I think that's super important.
Absolutely, 100%. I also think in that regard, networking is very, very huge as authors, because, again, as I mentioned before, a lot of people assume that, in this industry, it may be very cutthroat or maybe against each other. Well, okay. All good? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah. Sorry, spoke up again.
Yeah, thank goodness these are just pre-recorded, because if these were live, this would be so embarrassing.
Yeah, I cannot stand internet problems.
No. But as I was saying before, networking is very, very important for authors, and just networking in general. And, I've learned a lot from a lot of fellow authors, fellow editors, and just many other people in the industry. So, Bradley, are there any people you'd like to give a personal shout out to in your inner circle who have helped you on your journey as an author and as a writer?
That's a really great question. So I have made a lot of really profound and just very important and valuable friends just in the last few months alone since joining Substack. And that's why I will always be so grateful to that platform for connecting me to this community that I'm currently a part of, because these people have been incredible just to collaborate with, to like read their work, to have them read my work, like the sense of community. It's incredible. And that also obviously extends to yourself and all the other AudioMazes authors. I mean, I would count all of you as part of that. And I have to particularly as well, from an AudioMazes standpoint, I have to give a shout out to Colton Iverson, who is the director of publishing, I believe is his title at AudioMazes. Wonderful person who I consider a dear friend, and also from a professional standpoint, just an absolute amazing person to work with on all of the projects that I've been doing with AudioMazes. So shout out to Colton for sure, and the rest of the AudioMazes team, of course. And then, on Substack, I've made more friends than I can count. And what's funny is that a lot of them have actually gone on to apply to become AudioMazes authors. So some of the recent authors were people that I initially met on Substack. A couple names that I'll call out in particular. There's an author named Mina Howell, who's a fellow horror author on Substack that I have collaborated with, and I'm just a huge fan of her work. We're very similar in how we do horror. So she has been a great friend and ongoing friend of mine on Substack. And then I will also shout out on Substack TP Chaos. And they have also just recently become an AudioMazes author as well. And again, just the most supportive and genuine person. Just it's incredible to me that I can meet these people and know them for a few months and feel like I've known them for years, right? And then lastly, I'll call out a fellow poet as well on Substack who just goes by V Walker. And I actually interviewed her recently for my podcast, and so I got to learn more kind of about her backstory, if you will. And her poetry is just incredible, and honestly, it's so good that it inspired me to start writing poetry again. That's how good it was. So yeah, those are a few people off the top of my head. Like I said, I could keep going forever. There's so many people I'd love to shout out, but it really is incredible, the community over there.
Awesome. That is 100% amazing. Well, I know what I'm doing when we have our author meeting today. I'm going to tell Colton that you gave him a shout out. I would love to see his reaction. I know Kaylee's going to get a lot of laugh from that, but again, that's, the beautiful thing about the writing community is that it encompasses everybody, and everyone can go into this amazing safe space and just find one's tribe, find one's family. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. And I think you would definitely agree to, Bradley. So we now arrive at the final question of this incredible interview. And I think you gave an amazing answer to this question early, but perhaps you can expand upon it. So with everything you've learned in your career as a ghostwriter, your day job, working on short stories, poetry, building your Substack brand, and now writing your own personal stories, as well as writing stories for Audiomaze and really learning new skills in that sense. What is your word of wisdom to writers who want to take their passion and transform it from a hobby to a career?
I think it's so simple, but it's one of the things that I've seen on Substack a lot is that I have seen a lot of writers, not only there, but also over the course of my life, a lot of writers who are just so afraid, and reasonably so, but afraid to take that first step of putting their work out into the internet or any sort of public forum, And so many writers will just have like a horde of stories sitting on their cloud drive or their hard drive, right? And they're terrified of, obviously people not liking it. They're terrified of people not reading it. They're, it's the imposter syndrome that's kind of holding them back from taking that first step and putting something out into the world, right? And I've seen so many examples on Substack alone of writers who, either because of something that I said or something that they read of mine, I've had people reach out to me and be like, hey, I just wanted to say thank you. You inspired me to put my work out there. And that's obviously the nicest thing you can say to me. Like that's incredible. If I can inspire even one writer to put their work out into the world, then that's a victory right there. But in general, I've seen lots of people on Substack take that first step and put their writing out there and then just immediately get all kinds of support and feedback. And just, it washes away that imposter syndrome. And once they've taken that first step, then that they can start down the path of building their confidence, honing their craft, putting more work out there. And it's just, you just have to take that first step. And for so many people, that's the scariest thing in the world. And I understand that. But, you have to put yourself out there. One of my favorite things that I like to say when I'm having conversations with other authors on Substack, especially when it comes to subjects like this, I tell them very simply, I say that your art deserves to exist. So put it out in the world and, you will find your audience, and people will, not everybody's going to love it. And that's just a fact of life, but that's why it's art. It's subjective, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, it's, I could give all kinds of advice, but the most important advice of all is just put your work out there. Like I said, your art deserves to exist. Just let it exist out in the world. And then, then you can really kick off your journey towards wherever you want to go.
Amazing, Bradley. Absolutely amazing. And with that, viewers and listeners, we conclude another amazing author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I want to give a huge thank you to my friend Bradley for coming on the show. And hopefully this will not be the last time he is back on the show. Again, as I mentioned before, I am also the maze master for Audiomaze. So you will definitely see Bradley on that show, where he and I will be talking more in detail about his story for Audiomaze, as well as any future ones down the road. So Bradley, thank you so much for coming on the show. I greatly appreciate it. Now, where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out, as well as connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do have a profile on Audiomazes, of course. And you can also find me on Instagram. Threads and Blue Sky are kind of my main channels. And then, of course, on Substack, which is kind of my headquarters, my main platform. And if you would like to check out everything I'm doing at The Writer's Journey, you don't need a Substack account. You just go to bradleyramsey.substack.com, and that will take you straight to my publication where you can check out everything I'm doing over there.
Awesome. And as a little teaser for our Audiomaze, when can people expect your first book? Because I know you've written quite a few. So when can people expect your first story for Audiomaze to come out?
Yeah, so given current production schedules, hoping by the end of May, possibly early June, should be the first book.
Awesome. I will link all that down below in the description of this video, as well as the Audiomaze website to go and check out Bradley's account, as well as myself and many more on the platform. And also, if you're on Audiomaze, make sure to give us some support. Make sure to subscribe, check out our store, and check out the amazing stories that are coming out later this year, as well as those coming out potentially in a few months or so. As always, I want to give a huge thank you to Bradley for coming on the show. It was an absolute pleasure, and hopefully this won't be the last time we have him here on The Wandering Scribe. Who knows? Possibly, and I've been thinking about this, maybe by the end of this year, perhaps I can get all the authors of Audiomaze to come on the Wandering Scribe podcast as an authors roundtable. I know I haven't done that in such a long time, but I think is a possibility with Audiomaze. But if you want to see that happen, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. And also, before I forget, make sure to follow Bradley's social media accounts for his podcasts and many more. I'll make sure to include that down below as well. And as always, this is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out, wishing you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. And until next time, see you then.